All right, welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. Never any shortage of news in the Middle East. Dr. Alon Burstein here joining me to discuss all the latest headlines coming out of the region. Alon, as always, it's good to see you. Let's start here. The Times of Israel has this. President Trump is expressing hope that a Gaza ceasefire negotiation could see a breakthrough within a week, as sources are claiming that Benjamin Netanyahu was deliberately dragging out the negotiations. Two questions about this, Alon. I'll start with Netanyahu. What would Netanyahu get from dragging out the negotiations? What would be in it for him?
It's good to see you, Austin. I mean, that's one of the bigger questions that a lot of people have with regards to the war and the way the war has been handled is how does it pertain to internal Israeli politics? You know, I've said many times when it comes to Israel, Hamas, Palestinian Authority, United States, Iran, Syria, all these places, you have to look to their internal politics in order to understand how they operate in the region. Similarly, Netanyahu is always caught in a bind within his government. His government is made up of a coalition of people who disagree on a lot of different things. There's the ultra-Orthodox parties, there's the parties, the hawkish parties of Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He runs the Likud party. Some of them want mass expansion of settlements in the Gaza strips. Some of them want to preserve Israel as a more religious country and give exemption to certain ultra-Orthodox boys from the military. The Likud party has its own interests, and he is spending his life basically trying to balance these things. And when it comes to the war, when it comes to how the war operates, when it comes to ceasefires, hostage deals, humanitarian aid into Gaza, he is busy with everyone threatening to resign from his government for different reasons. Similarly here, he has threats coming from Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir to resign and tear apart his government if and when a hostage deal is signed and a ceasefire is reached. Then, at the same time, there's a lot of internal turmoil happening within Israel, unrelated to the war. I know it's hard to believe that there's stuff other than the war, but like any other country, unrelated to the war, there is a lot to do with a draft bill that relates to the ultra-Orthodox parties. And they today have already submitted their resignation. They haven't torn the government down yet, but the government may become a minority government. What Netanyahu would have to gain on a very, very practical level is getting towards the summer session of the Knesset. In 2 weeks, the Knesset goes essentially on leave for 3 months. And at that point, there could still be votes, but it'll be a lot harder to overthrow the government. So there are some speculations that Netanyahu wanted to postpone the deal until the summer session. And then Ben-Gvir and Smotrich will have a lot less of a threat in overthrowing the government. Some people believe that, some people don't. I will say that the first time the United States ever said that Netanyahu was governed by politics when it comes to the war is when then Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in January of 2024, when the first ceasefire broke down, he came to Israel and spoke to Netanyahu. And when he left, as he was going up to his plane, he was caught on camera saying, I can't believe Netanyahu would involve politics when it comes to the hostage release, which I sort of wanted to say, I can't believe you can't believe that. Everything's about politics. So a lot of people are saying, can it be that cynical when it's about preserving his government? Can it not? Again, as you know, I don't give my own opinion on what Netanyahu says. Fortunately, I'm not in his brain or in any other leader's brain. But circumstantial evidence does say that it'll be more convenient for him to progress towards a ceasefire in another week or so compared to now. I'll put it that way.
Live look at Gaza. We have been watching this camera for over a year and a half. For over a year alone. I gotta say, we talk about every little piece of information that comes about in relation to ceasefire negotiation discussion. The latest report from, let's put it back up, the Times of Israel, says that Trump is hopeful for ceasefire progress within a week. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't we see a report that said that exact same thing, like within the past week or two alone, and it didn't come true?
Well, I mean, an argument could be made that he was hopeful then too, and that was true, and that he's hopeful now. Look, at this point, the ceasefire negotiations are stuck, and everyone is reporting something different about why they're stuck. We spoke a couple days ago, I think, and I said that, Steve Witkoff said that, there were 4 obstacles, now there's 1 left, but everyone was saying it's a different one. So I don't think that any of the 4 have been fully resolved. Seemingly, though, there have been advances made on a couple of those obstacles. There's vast disagreement between Israel and Hamas about if and how humanitarian aid will be distributed in the Gaza Strip. According to reports, Qatar made a proposal that Israel accepted, Hamas maybe accepted. Then there are disagreements about if the United States will give guarantees to a complete ceasefire and an end to the war. Israel has not said anything. Trump has given, according to reports, certain guarantees to Hamas, and Israel's not said anything about that, so maybe that's resolved. The big debate that is happening right now relates to the idea of redeployment in the Gaza Strip. Every time there has been a ceasefire, the last two times, there have been ceasefires between Israel and Hamas. The IDF has pulled back to certain positions. And now we are really at a crossroads. And if you want to expand the camera on me a little bit, I'll show where there's actually the big crux of the argument. The argument is about where the IDF is going to move in the Gaza Strip over here. The IDF, Israel, would like to maintain its positions pretty much the way they are now. That includes a buffer zone all around the Gaza Strip, as well as maintaining the Tsarim corridor and maintaining, and this is the most important part, the Morag corridor. That is a corridor that the IDF has set up going basically along here, severing Rafah, which is about a fifth of the Gaza Strip, from the rest of Gaza. Hamas is adamant that it wants the IDF to withdraw back to the positions that it held on March 18th before this escalation started that do not include that Morag corridor. And that is very important because Israel has said that it is maintaining that Morag corridor, maintaining the area south of Rafah as a buffer zone of Gaza to Egypt, but also as an area that it says is clear. It is the first area that Israel has declared there's no Hamas activity in that area. Israel has other plans that it wants for the southern areas of the Gaza Strip. But that is really what the sides are fighting about right now. And that led the negotiations come to a complete stalemate as of a few days ago. I will say that 2 hours ago, there was a report in Israel's Channel 13, I believe, that some advances have been made. And the report said that Israel has moved more towards Hamas's position. I have no idea if that's true. That's not confirmed anywhere else and was not confirmed in the Palestinian sites, which usually would be the ones to say that Israel has moved more towards Hamas's position. But that's the latest news coming out from there.
Let's talk about humanitarian cities. Something that's been reported on widely, but something that you and I haven't exactly talked about yet on air. Some background: an Israeli scheme to move hundreds of thousands of already uprooted Palestinians to a so-called humanitarian city in Gaza has led politicians to spar with the defense establishment. But officials say that a practical plan has yet to be crafted, according to Reuters. Reuters says that even without a clear blueprint alone, opposition critics have denounced the proposal, with some likening the site to a concentration camp, which they say could lead to ethnic cleansing in Gaza. You and I, as I mentioned, haven't talked about this humanitarian city idea. Is this loosely part of a day after plan? What else would you have to say about this idea?
I think this is even still before a day after plan. This is sort of somewhere in the middle. This is part of Israel saying it wants to move towards a day after plan. So where this came about, roughly a week ago, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, speaking to reporters, also not caught on camera, speaking to reporters, made an announcement that Israel plans to build a humanitarian city in that southern area that I was just talking about, in this area of Rafah, build what he defined as a humanitarian city, which he said, I will add, the entire population of Gaza will be concentrated there. He did not say only several hundred thousand. He said initially 600,000 Palestinians from the El Mawasi area, that is the current humanitarian zone over here, would be concentrated in that quote unquote humanitarian city. And then the entire population of Gaza would be concentrated there. The logic, as far as he portrayed it, was that this will be an area that the IDF will establish checkpoints along that Morag corridor where it wants to maintain its positions, will establish checkpoints and stop Hamas from coming down into that area. And in that area, Israel will build facilities, hospitals, food distribution sites, etc. But he said also that Israel would not govern it, so it's unclear who will be governing it. And that way, according to what he presented, the Palestinian population could be concentrated there, and Israel could concentrate on cleansing the rest of Gaza from Hamas operatives. Now, some of the fine print of that is that he also added, and once Palestinians got into that area, they would not be allowed to leave. That's a pretty important anecdote to add to that fact. This is not an area that is supposed to be a humanitarian zone where people come in order to receive aid. This is an area where people are supposed to come so that they are then kept there until Israel decides or some sort of international agreement is reached. Israel is seemingly defending itself by saying, well, this would allow people to separate themselves from the violent activity, and therefore this would be permissible in international law because you are relocating the population away from violence. Critics of it, as you said, are saying, yes, but you are forcing them under order into an area where they are, according to you, the terms that Israel used, are concentrated in that area and are not allowed to leave. So that is where the debate about what this actually would entail, this quote unquote humanitarian city. The critics within Israel are pointing out several things. First of all, the IDF has said that it will take between 3 to 5 months to build this humanitarian city. And since then, in a second meeting with the government, the IDF said it would take over a year to build the infrastructure that is actually necessary if you want this to be a humanitarian area that can actually absorb the population and cater to its needs. So that's one in terms of Israel wanting to do this plan, according to Katz, between 30 to 60 days from now. The idea of saying that's not possible. A second critique, though, that has been leveled is the fact that Israel has openly said, and it has been proven, that Hamas uses the humanitarian zones just as much. Israel assassinated Muhammad Def, the leader of the Al Qassam brigades, in the Al Mawasi humanitarian zone. The idea that IDF checkpoints stop Hamas operatives from actually getting to that area, they do maybe stop weaponry from getting to that area, but the idea that this would actually be an effective mechanism to stopping Hamas from being able to govern the population or maintain its political entity, a lot of critics within Israel have said that's not really going to happen. The last thing I'll say about that, about the critique, because again, the government in Israel, Netanyahu said he's in favor of this, Katz has said he's in favor of this. So there are those that are supporting. But in terms of the critique, a letter was sent in Israel by 16 scholars of international law who both warned about the fact that this would constitute a violation of war crimes and also would constitute crimes against humanity with the under the categories of forcibly moving the population and etc. But an important thing that they added that I think is being overlooked by a lot of people who might be proponents of this plan is they said, and let us not forget, Israel is still on trial in the International Court of Justice on the charges of genocide. That trial that we haven't spoken about because the court has not met for many months, but that trial that South Africa brought charges against Israel, the court did not throw that trial out. The court is going to debate it. It leveled injunctions on Israel already many, many months ago. And Israel is in the process of building its case and building a defense. And those scholars said, be careful. This lends a lot of evidence to the charges of genocide because when we think genocide, we tend to think Nazi Germany. We tend to think, death camps. But according to international law, one of the elements of genocide is also if you create inhospitable conditions that can lead to mass deaths of the population. So there's a lot of critique, even within Israel and internationally. The proponents are defending themselves and are also citing international law. You're supposed to allow people to get to humanitarian areas. That's the ongoing debate at this point.
Is it actually feasible that figures like Netanyahu could be punished as a result of that?
At this point, it's less likely. We don't have an international police that's actually effective. Even the ICC, the International Criminal Court, that has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel's Defense Minister Gallant, and a lot of other figures, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, they don't have actually any jurisdiction in areas where countries have not agreed to that jurisdiction. So there are countries, most of the countries in Europe, that have said that if Netanyahu lands in their territory, please don't come here because we'll have to arrest you. And while it seems like, okay, will they or won't they, I always bring the example of when the arrest warrant was issued for Vladimir Putin, Russia is a stronger country than Israel. He was supposed to arrive in South Africa for some sort of convention, and South Africa said, please don't come here because if you do, we will have to arrest you. And we really, really don't want to arrest the president of Russia. South Africa does not want to do that. And they ended up canceling the trip. So I bring that as an example of, it may seem like a farce, this whole thing of international law, but the countries that are signed onto it do take it seriously. That said, strong countries that have a strong backing in the United Nations or a strong presence on the world scene, their leaders do not tend to actually face accountability in international court systems, as opposed to weaker countries, leaders of Sudan, leaders of other countries that have ended up in the international court system. One last thing I'll say, I've said many times, Israel, and specifically Netanyahu, is developing a an increasing dependency on U.S. President Trump, this is one of the examples. If Israel were to lose the support of the United States for any reason, and Trump, has expressed a lot of support for Israel, but it's also been shown that he can flip flop when it comes to how he treats different leaders. If he ever turned against Netanyahu, that would already be very damning. Netanyahu might not be able to leave the country because today no one would risk, even any other country would risk acting against Netanyahu because that would upset Trump. At a later point, if Trump didn't care, I think it would be a different story.
Get one more question in here before we go. I want to talk about civilians in Gaza. I want to talk about some of the IDF activity that we've been seeing in recent months. The UN Rights Office said on Tuesday alone that it had recorded at least 875 killings within the past 6 weeks at aid points in Gaza, run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, as well as convoys run by other relief groups, including the UN. The majority of those killed were in the vicinity of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites, while the remaining 201 were killed on the routes of other aid convoys. This is something you lightly alluded to earlier in the conversation. I'll ask you to expand on it. What do we know about these strikes and these killings alone? Is this something we don't talk about enough? Are they killing civilians, Hamas members, both? Is it even possible to really know?
It's very difficult to know, but we can piece together, as always, like different reports and try to build a cohesive picture. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation came onto the scene in a storm at the end of May, and it was supposed to replace the humanitarian aid routes of the aid trucks that were coming in that Hamas was taking over. I'll say at least a good amount of them. Israel says all of them. It's been proven it's not all of them, but it's been proven that it is a lot of them. And these are stationary distribution sites. There's 4 of them, 1 in the central parts of the Gaza Strip and 3 in the southern parts. And they are giving away food basically to anyone. You don't have to have any registration or anything. It was meant to be something that will change these trucks that come into centers of the cities and then can just be taken over. These are areas that are secured by the IDF. People can come as many times as they want, receive aid packages, but it's supposed to stop Hamas from taking over those aid packages. This caused several things. First, it made Hamas angry and scared. Hamas thrives on the humanitarian aid. It thrives on the thefts. It has built a very, very elaborate scheme of a black market across the Gaza Strip. And the decrease of humanitarian aid trucks that are coming in throughout the Strip, there's still aid trucks going to northern Gaza, but the vast decrease led them to be very much against the activity of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And they carried out at least one attack that they also said that they did, but also there's been attacks on Palestinians and on IDF troops in and around these areas to make them be less safe. So that's one thing that happened. A second thing that happened is there was a vast amount of people that were coming in after months that there was no food coming into Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people were storming these different aid sites. This led to simply brawls and violence that happened within. And in a situation where you have the IDF securing it from afar, that's a recipe for violence. That's a recipe for gunfire. You see mass amounts of Palestinians fighting each other, then you end up with IDF troops shooting. A third thing, with that I'll end, there was a report in Israel's Haaretz news site that also brought testimony of IDF soldiers who also said that in order to disperse the crowds, when there's too much of a concentration of crowds in a way that may threaten them, they end up shooting into the air and sometimes shooting into the crowd because their mission is to secure these aid sites, because that is one of the things that is a mission of Israel in order to stop Hamas from getting the aid. So put all those stories together. Hamas carrying out attacks, reports that the IDF troops also using live fire, and internal violence just as a result of pressure. That is the result of the at least 800 people that have been killed in and around those aid sites.
Alon, as always, appreciate the information. Alon uploads his own Middle East updates on his personal YouTube channel. You can go give him a follow there. As always, Alon, it's good to see you. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you. Have a good night.